The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every step echo a little louder than usual, and she walked slowly, holding a small paper bag close to her chest. It wasn't heavy, but to her it felt like something valuable, something worth protecting, because inside was the leftover food she had managed to save from the day. She wasn't carrying it with pride, she was carrying it with a sort of gentle care, as though she knew it wasn't much, but it mattered. Her shoes were worn down from miles of walking, the kind of shoes that had molded to her feet over the years, and the faint tapping against the pavement carried her tiredness in every beat. She moved with that quiet dignity people have when life has not been kind, yet they still choose to keep going, holding on to the little they have with a grace that could only come from a soft and generous heart. Her clothes spoke of hard days too, a faded dress that had once been bright but now carried the stories of many washes and many roads walked. Still, there was something about her presence that was gentle, almost comforting, the kind of presence you might feel when someone smiles at you even when they are tired. She wasn't thinking about who might be watching her. She wasn't worried about how she appeared to others. Her mind was occupied with simple, human thoughts, like how she would make the small amount of food last, how she might share it tomorrow with someone who needed it more, or perhaps how she would quietly thank God for one more day. She had learned long ago that blessings didn't always come in grand forms. Sometimes they came in the shape of a half-filled bag of food that could calm hunger for just a little while longer. The streetlight above her flickered, casting shadows that danced along the sidewalk, but she walked on, not startled, not in a hurry, just steady and calm. Cars rushed by, filled with people hurrying home or toward their plans, and yet she moved at her own pace, carrying her little bag as though it was her only treasure. For her, it truly was. It was more than just food. It was a reminder that she had made it through another day, that somehow she had managed to gather enough to keep going, that her resilience was still intact. Life had tested her again and again, but here she was, still standing, still walking, still caring enough to carry something as small as leftovers with a quiet gratitude in her heart. Up ahead, traffic slowed at a signal, and a line of cars idled with their headlights glowing across the street. Among them was one car where a young boy sat, restless and curious, his small hands pressed against the window as he looked outside. Children have a way of noticing things adults often overlook, and his wide, innocent eyes caught sight of the woman walking past with her bag. To him, she was not just another stranger in the night. To him, there was something familiar, something kind, something that stirred a memory deep within his heart. He pressed his face closer to the glass, watching her intently, and without even realizing it, he was holding his breath, as though he didn't want to blink and lose sight of her. She continued walking, unaware that her presence was pulling at the strings of a child's memory, unaware that the small act of carrying her leftovers was about to connect two very different worlds together. The woman slowed for a moment to adjust the strap of her bag, looking up at the stars faintly peeking through the city haze. There was no bitterness in her gaze, no resentment, only a tired but peaceful acceptance. She had lived enough to know that life was not always fair, but she had also lived enough to know that kindness, no matter how small, had a way of returning when least expected. She carried her food as though she carried hope, a fragile yet powerful thing, tucked safely against her chest. The boy in the car watched her every move, his little heart beating with recognition, while his father, focused on the road, had not yet noticed the silent thread weaving its way between his son and the woman outside. Every step she took was a story, though no one else could hear it. It was a story of survival, of quiet sacrifices, of choosing to share even when she didn't have much. It was a story that didn't need to be told in words, because sometimes a worn dress, a tired smile, and a bag of leftovers can say more about love and resilience than anything else ever could. She didn't know it yet, but this simple walk of hers, this ordinary act of holding on to what little she had, was about to mean something extraordinary for the child watching her. For him, she wasn't just a woman carrying food. For him, she was a memory of kindness, a reminder of a moment when someone gave without expecting anything in return, a moment that had stayed with him and would now return full circle in the most unexpected way. And so she kept walking, unaware that her quiet grace had already changed a life, unaware that a little boy's heart was about to speak out and bridge the gap between the kindness she had given long ago and the kindness that was now making its way back to her. The boy's eyes widened in that pure way only a child's eyes can, wide with wonder and a sudden spark of memory that rushed to the surface of his young heart. He pressed his hand against the cold glass of the car window, leaning forward as though the glass itself was the only barrier keeping him from reaching out to the woman walking by. His voice, filled with urgency but also with excitement, broke through the hum of the engine and the silence inside the car. He cried out, "Daddy, it's her!" His little hand tapped against the glass, his finger pointing in her direction, his voice carrying both innocence and a kind of reverence, as if he had just spotted someone extraordinary. His father turned his head slightly, startled by the sudden outburst, his eyes quickly searching the street to understand what had captured his son's attention so completely. At first, to the father, she seemed like just another passerby, a woman walking alone in the night with a small bag in her hand. Nothing about her appearance immediately spoke of something special or remarkable. But children see with their hearts before they see with their eyes, and the boy's excitement was not misplaced. The father furrowed his brows and asked softly, "Who, son? Who do you mean?" The boy's little face pressed closer against the window, his breath fogging the glass, his small finger still pointing directly at her. His voice, steady yet tender, replied with all the certainty in the world, "It's the lady, Daddy, the one who gave me food at the park when I was hungry." The father blinked, his mind catching on the words, trying to piece them together. He looked again at the woman with more intention this time, and though he still could not connect her face to his memory, his son's conviction was too strong to dismiss. The boy was no longer restless in his seat. He was fixed, rooted in the moment, his little chest rising quickly with the rhythm of his excitement. Children carry memories of kindness in a way that glows like a lantern inside them. Unlike many adults, they do not let those lights dim or get buried under the weight of life's worries. For him, that day at the park was not some fleeting moment. It had carved itself into his heart, and seeing her again now was like a miracle unfolding before his very eyes. He remembered it clearly, even if time had blurred some of the smaller details. He remembered being hungry, sitting quietly with his small stomach rumbling, not wanting to trouble his father, who was busy with work calls and responsibilities. He had felt small and unseen in a world that moved so quickly around him. Then, like a gentle breeze, she had appeared. The woman who now walked past their car had once sat beside him, noticing his quiet hunger, and had shared what little she had. She hadn't asked for thanks, hadn't demanded anything in return. She had smiled warmly and placed a small portion of food in his hands, enough to fill not just his stomach, but his heart. That moment had stayed with him, not because of the food itself, but because of the kindness woven into it. It was the kind of kindness a child never forgets. Now, seeing her again, he could not contain his joy. His words poured out, simple and honest. "Daddy, that's her. She didn't have much, but she gave me her lunch. Remember when I told you?" The father searched his son's eyes, and in them he found no hesitation, no doubt. The child was telling the truth. It was not a story imagined, it was a memory cherished, resurfacing in the glow of the car's headlights and the shadows of the street. The boy's voice softened as he added, almost in a whisper, "She was kind to me when no one else was." The father felt something stir within him. It was one thing to hear about kindness in abstract stories, or to teach children about generosity, but it was another to witness your child recognize it so deeply, to see the impact of a small act ripple into the present. He turned his gaze back to the woman, this time not just looking at her but truly seeing her. She carried herself with quiet humility, unaware of the eyes that watched her from the car, unaware that a child's heart still carried her kindness like a treasure. The father saw the bag in her hands and realized it held leftovers, a detail that only deepened the truth of his son's words. If she had been willing to share when she had so little, then this was a woman who lived her life by the simple but powerful rule of giving even when it cost something. The boy's excitement did not fade. He kept looking, almost afraid she would vanish into the crowd, almost afraid that if he looked away, the moment would disappear. "Daddy, can we help her? Please?" His small voice carried both gratitude and urgency, a desire to give back in some way to the person who had once given to him. It wasn't just about recognizing her anymore. It was about wanting to honor her kindness, wanting to make sure she knew she hadn't been forgotten. For him, this was not just an ordinary night, and she was not just another passerby. She was proof that goodness exists, that it can come from unexpected places, and that it can plant seeds that last long after the act itself. The father felt his throat tighten with emotion, touched not only by the story itself but by the way his son carried it. Children are mirrors in many ways, reflecting back the values they see and magnifying the ones they experience firsthand. And here was his son, not holding on to bitterness or selfishness, but holding on to gratitude, love, and the memory of someone who had seen him in a moment of need. He realized in that moment that the woman outside was not simply a kind stranger. She had become a part of his son's heart, shaping him in ways words alone could not. The boy's voice rose again, a little more insistent. "Daddy, she's the reason I know what kindness feels like." Those words, innocent and raw, pierced the father's heart. He looked once more at the woman, her tired steps, her fragile bag of food, and he realized that while she might not have much in her hands, she carried an abundance in her spirit. She carried generosity, compassion, and love, the kind of treasures that never fade no matter how worn one's clothes become or how heavy one's journey feels. And so, while the traffic light changed and cars began to roll forward, the father hesitated, his heart caught in the moment his son had revealed. It was as if time had slowed, giving him a chance to choose whether he would let this connection pass by or whether he would honor it, as his son so dearly wanted him to. Inside the car, the boy still pointed, his eyes shining, his heart open, waiting for his father to act, waiting for the circle of kindness to close and begin again. In that small but profound moment, everything had shifted. What had begun as a simple recognition from a child had become a call to remember that kindness is never wasted, that it plants itself in the hearts of others and grows silently until the day it blooms again. The woman had no idea she was being recognized, no idea that a little boy's heart was shouting with gratitude, but soon she would. Soon, the kindness she had once given without thought of return would come back to her in ways she never imagined, carried forward by the innocence of a child and the love of a father, who now truly understood the depth of what a single act of generosity could mean. The father sat quietly for a moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel, his eyes still following the figure of the woman as she walked steadily along the sidewalk. The boy beside him had fallen into a hushed stillness, as though the very act of recognizing her had left him both in awe and in a place of quiet remembering. The father's mind, however, was alive, turning over the weight of what his son had said, letting the words echo again and again. She was the one who had given him food at the park. She was the reason his son knew what kindness felt like. The father thought back to that day, remembering how his boy had come running to him, bright-eyed and carrying a story about a lady who had given him her lunch. At the time he had smiled, grateful that a stranger had looked after his child for even a brief moment. But it was only now, seeing her with his own eyes, that he began to understand the depth of that gesture. It is one thing to hear about kindness, another to watch its effect etched into the heart of your child. The father saw how his son's eyes shone, how his voice trembled with urgency and gratitude. It struck him that children do not hold on to the things we adults cling to, the worries about money, work, or appearances. Instead, they hold on to moments of being seen, of being cared for, of being given something that comes from love. That was what his son had held on to all this time, not the taste of the food, not the details of the day, but the love and care wrapped inside that act. The father leaned back in his seat for a brief moment, his chest heavy with thought. He realized how little it must have taken for her to share, and yet how great it had become in his son's heart. He looked at the small paper bag she carried now, the same kind of bag that must have once held the food she gave away. To most people, it would look insignificant, hardly worth noticing. But to him, that bag represented something vast. It symbolized her spirit, a spirit that could find room for generosity even when her own hands were not full. She had known what hunger felt like, perhaps, and so she had answered his son's hunger with her own compassion. She had been tired, perhaps, even then, but still she had noticed a little boy sitting alone, and she had chosen to give. The father's heart softened in a way he had not expected. He thought of how often he rushed past people on the street, his eyes fixed on the next meeting, the next errand, the next obligation. He wondered how many times he had overlooked souls like hers, people carrying both burdens and treasures in quiet ways. Now, watching her move step by step, shoulders slightly hunched from the weight of life, he saw not just a woman, but a lesson walking before him. She had lived what he often tried to teach his son, that kindness matters. She had shown it not with speeches or grand gestures, but with the simple act of giving a piece of her meal to a hungry child. The boy tugged at his sleeve gently, his voice low but steady. "Daddy, she helped me when I needed it most. Can't we help her now?" The father turned to look at him, at those small eyes filled with a kind of wisdom that only innocence can hold. He nodded slowly, feeling a swell of emotion rise inside him. In his son's simple request, he saw the purest reflection of gratitude, of the desire to give back. He realized that while he had been trying to teach his son the values of life, it was in fact his son who was reminding him of them now. As he glanced again at the woman, he noticed how she clutched her bag with care, as though afraid of losing even a crumb. He thought of the countless meals he had taken for granted, the times he had left plates unfinished without thought, and the contrast of her holding on to something so modest with such quiet reverence humbled him deeply. This was not just about food. This was about resilience, about dignity, about a heart that had chosen love despite scarcity. He realized that his son had remembered her not just because she gave, but because she gave with warmth. That warmth had left an imprint, one that had carried into this very night and stirred both his son's memory and his own conscience. The father felt a shift inside him, a stirring of responsibility, not born out of pity, but out of respect. He wanted to honor the woman for what she had unknowingly done. She had given him a gift too, though indirectly. She had shown his son the meaning of generosity, and in doing so, she had reminded him that the truest lessons in life often come not from textbooks or classrooms, but from ordinary people living quietly with extraordinary grace. He imagined what her life must be like, the challenges she had faced, the nights she had gone without, the quiet prayers whispered into the dark. And yet, here she was, still walking, still carrying, still giving. There was no bitterness in her movements, only a steady strength. He thought about how rare it was to find someone who could give without expecting return, who could plant seeds of kindness not knowing when or where they would bloom. And now, standing at this intersection of past and present, he saw that seed blooming in his own son's heart. The boy continued to watch her, his little hand resting now on his father's arm, waiting for him to respond, waiting for him to take action. The father knew that this was more than a chance meeting. It was a moment meant to be noticed, meant to be acted upon. If he let it pass, he would not only be ignoring the woman, but also dismissing the light in his son's eyes. He realized that to honor this moment meant stepping beyond the comfort of just watching and moving into the courage of gratitude in action. The cars behind him began to honk softly as the light changed again. But he didn't mind. For once, he wasn't in a hurry to move forward. His eyes were on her, his heart open in a way it hadn't been in a long time. He thought of how often life circles back, how acts we think are small ripple outward and return in unexpected ways. This was one of those ripples. He could feel it. She had no idea that her kindness had remained alive in his son's memory, no idea that tonight her path would cross with theirs again. But he knew, and now it was his turn to choose how to carry this knowledge. He felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. Not just for the woman, but for his son, too, for reminding him of what truly matters. It was easy to be swept away by the noise of life, but moments like this brought clarity, stripping away the unnecessary until only truth remained. And the truth was that the woman walking with her bag of leftovers was more than she appeared. She was a teacher without knowing it, a giver without keeping count, a quiet soul whose simple act had carried weight far greater than she could have imagined. The father knew that he could not let her pass unnoticed. He had to acknowledge her, to let her know that what she had done mattered, that it had planted something good in the world. He felt the stirring of resolve in his chest, a resolve to honor her, to meet her generosity with gratitude, to let his son see that kindness is not only received but also returned. And in that moment, as he prepared to step out of the car, he realized that the world was often changed not by grand acts of power, but by small acts of love that ripple outward, touching hearts and drawing them together. The boy's smile widened, as though he could sense what his father was thinking. He leaned closer, whispering softly, "She deserves to know we remember." And with those words, the father's heart was sealed in its decision. He opened the door slowly, stepping out into the night air, his eyes still fixed on the woman whose quiet strength had unknowingly bound their lives together. He walked with purpose, not out of duty, but out of deep respect, carrying with him not only his own gratitude, but also the gratitude of his son. And though she did not yet know it, her kindness was about to return to her, full and radiant, proving that what we give in love always finds its way back to us in time. The night air was cool and carried a softness that seemed to quiet the sounds of the city. The father stepped toward the woman slowly, each step filled with both humility and intention. The woman glanced up, slightly startled to see someone approaching her, and instinctively held her small bag a little closer to her chest. Her eyes reflected both caution and exhaustion, the eyes of someone who had learned not to expect much from strangers. Yet there was also a quiet gentleness in her expression, as if even in her weariness she still carried patience for the world around her. The father stopped just close enough to speak without startling her further. His voice came out calm and respectful, carrying a tone of gratitude that came from deep within him. He thanked her softly, telling her how much her act of kindness had meant to his son, how the food she had once shared at the park had remained alive in the boy's memory as a light that had never faded. At first she seemed unsure, her brows furrowed as though she did not quite believe what she was hearing. She tilted her head slightly, trying to place the memory, and then slowly her expression softened. A faint smile tugged at her lips, the kind of smile that comes not from pride but from quiet surprise that something so small could have mattered so much. She whispered almost under her breath that she had only done what anyone should do, that she had seen a child hungry and could not have walked away. Her words were humble, almost apologetic, as if she could not imagine being thanked for something she had always considered simply the right thing to do. The boy, unable to stay in the car any longer, pushed the door open and ran to her side. His small arms wrapped tightly around her, as though afraid she might disappear again. His embrace startled her, and for a moment she stood frozen, clutching her bag in one hand while the other hovered uncertainly. Then, slowly, she lowered the bag to her side and placed her free hand gently on his shoulder, her eyes misting as she looked down at the child who had not forgotten her. It had been such a small gesture on her part that day in the park, yet here he was, years later, holding on to her with gratitude so pure it felt like a gift far greater than anything she had given. The father watched this tender reunion with his heart swelling, he realized that life often brings us back to the people who have touched us, even if only for a brief moment, and he felt grateful that his son was able to express his thankfulness in such a genuine way. He reached into his pocket, not out of charity, but out of deep respect, and offered her something to help ease her burdens. She shook her head at first, her instinct to refuse strong, but the father spoke softly, reminding her that kindness deserves to flow both ways, that just as she had given freely to his son, it was now their turn to give freely to her. After a moment of hesitation, she accepted, her eyes lowering as though she did not quite feel worthy, but the boy squeezed her hand and said with all the innocence in his voice, "You are the reason I know kindness." Those words broke through the last of her resistance, and she allowed herself to receive the love being offered to her. In that moment, something remarkable unfolded. It was not about money, not about food, not about who had more or less. It was about the invisible thread that ties human hearts together through acts of love, however small. The woman stood there, no longer just a weary figure on the sidewalk, but someone seen, someone honored, someone remembered. The father felt his son's lesson settle into his own heart more deeply than ever. Kindness, he realized, does not vanish into the air once it is given. It lingers, it grows, it circles back when the time is right, carrying with it the proof that no act of love is ever wasted. The woman's smile grew, soft and tender, as she looked at the boy and his father. She whispered her thanks, though it was clear she felt words could never capture what she was feeling. To her, the night had begun like any other, just another walk home with a bag of leftovers and tired feet. Yet now it had turned into a reminder that love given away does not disappear. It had returned to her through the gratitude of a child and the respect of a father. She held her bag a little differently now, not as though it was her only treasure, but as though it was a symbol of something larger, a reminder that her life still carried meaning in ways she had not imagined. The boy clung to her hand as though reluctant to let go, and she squeezed back, her tired eyes shining with a warmth that came from being remembered. The father gently guided his son back, but before stepping away, he assured the woman that what she had done had mattered more than she could know, and that they would not forget her again. She nodded, her heart full, her spirit lifted, walking on now with steps a little lighter than before. As the father and son returned to their car, the boy turned to watch her until she faded into the distance. His heart was peaceful, not because he had received anything, but because he had been able to give back a little of what had been given to him. The father started the engine, his eyes wet but his heart clear. He knew his son had been changed by that one act of generosity, and now he too had been changed by the chance to honor it. The night continued as it always does, but for them, it was no longer just an ordinary night. It was a night where kindness had come full circle, where a woman who once gave from her little had received love in return, where a boy had learned that gratitude has power, and where a father had remembered that the greatest lessons in life often arrive quietly, wrapped in the simple acts of people who expect nothing in return. And though the world hurried on around them, they carried with them the quiet certainty that kindness given is never lost. It always finds its way back, and it always leaves the world a little softer, a little brighter, and a little more full of love.